At 63, she realized she'd become invisible to the man she loved. Will she vanish or fight to reclaim her light? I stood in the kitchen, the heart of our colonial home in Fairfield, Connecticut, scrubbing a pan from last night's anniversary dinner. 40 years with James, and the weight of it pressed against my ribs like a bruise. The house gleamed, polished wood floors, hydrangeas in a crystal vase, the kind of perfection you'd see in a Martha Stewart spread. But perfection is a lie, and I was about to learn how deep that lie ran. The clock ticked toward 8, and James lingered at the table, sipping coffee, his eyes flicking to his phone. I waited for him to say something, anything, about our milestone. Instead, he looked up, his gaze sliding over me like I was furniture, and said words that shattered my world. "Susan, you've really let yourself go," he said, his voice casual, like he was commenting on the weather. "Look at Linda across the street, she's what, 60? Still turns heads." The pan slipped from my hands, clanging into the sink. My reflection stared back from the blackened window, a graying woman in a faded cardigan, eyes hollowed by decades of putting everyone else first. Linda, with her Pilates-toned arms and highlighted hair, was the kind of woman James noticed now. Not me. Not the woman who'd raised his kids, hosted his clients, and kept this house a showroom for his success. My throat tightened, a scream trapped behind my teeth. How dare he? After 40 years of ironing his shirts, soothing his ego, and swallowing my own dreams, this was my reward, a knife twist of betrayal disguised as a passing remark. I turned, my hands dripping suds, and searched his face for remorse. There was none. Just that smug tilt of his mouth, the same one he used when he joked about my mom jeans at last year's firm party. My heart pounded, a drumbeat of rage and grief. I'd given him everything, my youth, my ambitions, my body, stretched and softened by 2 pregnancies. I'd been the backbone of this family, invisible but unbreakable. Or so I thought. Now, I saw the truth. To James, I was a function, not a person. A cook, a cleaner, a prop in his perfect life. The realization burned, a wildfire scorching through the lies I'd told myself to keep going. "Linda?" I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "That's who you're measuring me against?" He shrugged, eyes back on his phone. "Just saying, you could try harder." Try harder. The words echoed, each one a slap. I wanted to hurl the pan at him, to scream that I'd tried harder than he'd ever know. Instead, I stood frozen, the weight of his dismissal crushing me. My mind raced, replaying every sacrifice, nights spent soothing Sarah's fevers. Mornings driving Michael to soccer, years of smiling through James's suggestions to look younger, thinner, better. For what? To be compared to a neighbor who had the luxury of time and a personal trainer? The kitchen, once my sanctuary, felt like a cage. I was 63. And the woman I'd been, the one who dreamed of art galleries and Italian summers, had vanished. James's words weren't just cruel, they were a mirror, forcing me to see how I'd let myself disappear. But beneath the pain, something stirred, a spark of defiance, faint but fierce. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. As James walked out, oblivious to the storm he'd unleashed, I made a silent vow, I'd find myself again. No matter what it took. The kitchen clock mocked me with its relentless ticking, each second a reminder of James's words, "You've really let yourself go." I sat at the oak table, alone in our Fairfield colonial, the silence louder than any argument. 40 years of marriage, and I was reduced to a comparison with Linda, the neighborhood's golden girl who jogged in Lululemon while I scrubbed pots. My hands trembled, still smelling of dish soap, as I traced the lines of a life I'd built for him, for us. The photo on the fridge caught my eye, James and me at Sarah's graduation, my smile wide but tired, his arm around me like an afterthought. When had I become invisible? The question clawed at me, unearthing a grief so raw it felt like betrayal, not just by James, but by the woman I'd let myself become. I wandered to the living room, past the shelves of Emily Post etiquette books and framed family portraits, each one a monument to my sacrifices. I'd been 23 when I met James, a receptionist with dreams of painting in Parisian cafes. He was ambitious, charming, and I traded my easel for a wedding ring, thinking love would be enough. I raised Sarah and Michael, planned his firm's galas, and nodded through his critiques, my hair too dull, my dresses too frumpy. I'd swallowed it all, believing it was my job to keep the peace. But peace at what cost? My chest ached, a hollow space where my own desires used to live. I sank onto the couch, clutching a throw pillow like a lifeline. My mind replayed every moment I'd dimmed myself for him. The time he suggested I skip dessert at a client dinner, his eyes on the waitress's figure instead of mine. The way he'd linger at parties, laughing with women like Linda, while I stood by with a practiced smile. I'd been the perfect wife, the invisible glue holding our life together, and he'd repaid me with a careless jab that cut deeper than any affair. The betrayal wasn't just his words, it was the truth they revealed. I'd betrayed myself, letting my identity erode until I was just James's wife. Why didn't I see it? I whispered, my voice cracking in the empty room. The question hung there, unanswered, as tears burned my eyes. I wanted to rage, to call him and demand an apology, but what good would it do? He'd shrug, like he always did, and I'd be left picking up the pieces. No, this wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about the woman I'd buried under years of laundry and pot roasts. I stood, my legs shaky but resolute, and walked to the mirror in the hall. The face staring back was tired, lined, but there was something else, a flicker of defiance, a spark I hadn't seen in decades. I thought of my mother, who'd warned me about losing myself in marriage. Don't let a man define you, Susan, she'd said, her voice sharp with regret. I'd ignored her, thinking I was different. Now, at 63, I saw her wisdom. James's betrayal was a wake-up call, a chance to reclaim the Susan who dreamed, who laughed, who mattered. My heart raced, fear and hope colliding. Could I start over? The idea was terrifying, but the alternative, staying invisible, was worse. As dawn broke, painting the sky pink, I knew one thing: I was done disappearing. This was my reckoning, and I'd face it head-on. Dawn bled through the curtains, but I was already awake, haunted by the ghost of James's words, "You've let yourself go." I stood in our Fairfield kitchen, clutching a cold coffee mug, the weight of 40 years with him crushing me. The house, with its pottery barn throw blankets and gleaming granite counters, felt like a museum of my invisibility. Every polished surface mocked me, a testament to the life I'd built for James, Sarah, Michael, and never for myself. My heart thudded, a mix of fury and sorrow, as I realized the betrayal wasn't just his. I'd betrayed myself, letting my dreams dissolve into the background of his success. The truth was a blade, and I was bleeding. I paced to the dining room, where our anniversary cards sat unopened, their cheerful hallmark promises a cruel joke. I'd spent decades playing the perfect wife, baking PTA cupcakes, ironing James's Brooks Brothers shirts, smiling through his helpful critiques of my weight, my hair, my everything. For what? To be measured against Linda, the neighbor who flaunted her yoga-sculpted figure like a trophy? I sank into a chair, my fingers tracing the table's wood grain, and let the memories flood in. At 23, I'd been vibrant, sketching cityscapes and dreaming of art school. James's ambition swept me up, and I traded my pencils for diaper bags, thinking it was love. Now, at 63, I saw the cost. I'd become a shadow, valued only for what I did, not who I was. Why didn't I fight back? I muttered, my voice raw in the silent house. The question burned, stirring a rage I'd buried for years. I thought of the times James's eyes lingered on women like Linda at firm parties, his laughter too warm, while I stood by, clutching a wine glass and my pride. I'd excused it, telling myself it was harmless, that my role was to keep our family steady. But his words last night weren't harmless, they were a verdict, declaring me unworthy. The pain was visceral, a fist in my gut, but it also cracked something open. I wasn't just hurt, I was awake. For the first time in years, I felt the pulse of my own anger, my own worth. I walked to the fireplace, where a photo of us at Michael's wedding sat on the mantel. My smile was tight, my dress chosen to flatter my figure, as James had suggested. I wanted to smash the frame, to scream at the woman who'd let herself shrink. Instead, I touched the glass, whispering, "You're still here." The words felt like a lifeline. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, "Don't let a man steal your fire, Susan." She'd seen this coming, her own marriage a cautionary tale. I'd ignored her, but now her warning was my rallying cry. I wasn't just James's wife or Sarah and Michael's mom. I was Susan, artist, dreamer, woman, and I'd buried her long enough. My phone buzzed, a text from James, "Meeting ran late. Home by 10. No apology, no acknowledgement of the bomb he'd dropped. I stared at the screen, my resolve hardening. This wasn't about fixing him or our marriage, not yet. It was about saving myself. The thought was terrifying, a leap into the unknown, but the alternative was suffocating. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the room, I made a choice. I'd claw my way back to the woman I was meant to be, no matter how much it hurt. My coffee was cold, but I gripped the mug like it could anchor me against the storm James had unleashed. "You've let yourself go." His words echoed in our Fairfield kitchen, each syllable a shard of glass in my chest. The house, with its Williams-Sonoma gadgets and framed family photos, was a shrine to 40 years of my sacrifices, years I'd spent molding myself into the perfect wife, mother, and hostess, only to be judged wanting next to Linda's Pilates perfected glow. At 63, I stood amidst the wreckage of my own complacency. My heart a battleground of rage and grief. James's betrayal wasn't just a careless jab, it was a mirror, forcing me to face the woman I'd let myself become, someone I barely recognized. I drifted to the front porch, the morning air sharp with the scent of cut grass and impending fall. Our cul-de-sac was a postcard of suburban bliss, but it felt like a prison. I'd built this life for James, for Sarah and Michael, sanding down my edges to fit their needs. At 23, I'd been a dreamer, sketching skylines and craving adventure. James's charm and ambition seduced me, and I swapped my art supplies for a KitchenAid mixer, believing it was enough. Now, the weight of those choices crushed me. I'd hosted his firm's barbecues, cheered at Michael's Little League games, and nodded through James's suggestions to dye my hair or skip dessert. I'd thought it was love. It was erasure. How did I let this happen? I whispered, my voice trembling against the quiet. Tears stung, but they weren't just for James's cruelty. They were for me, for the Susan who'd once laughed freely, who'd wanted more than a spotless house and a husband's approval. His comparison to Linda wasn't just a betrayal, it was a revelation. I'd been complicit, shrinking myself to fit his world, ignoring the ache of my own unlived dreams. Every time he'd flirted with women at parties or critiqued my appearance, I'd swallowed my hurt, thinking it was my duty. Duty had cost me everything. I sank onto the porch swing, its creak a metronome to my racing thoughts. My mind flashed to last Christmas, when James had lingered too long with Linda at the neighborhood potluck, her laughter ringing while I refilled the punch bowl. I'd brushed it off, but now it burned. He didn't just see me as less, he saw me as nothing, a prop in his success story. The pain was a wildfire, but it was also a spark. I wasn't just a victim, I was awake. And the anger pulsing through me felt like power. I could stay here, bitter and broken, or I could fight for the woman I'd buried. My phone buzzed, James, texting about a client dinner, as if last night's bomb hadn't exploded. "Be ready by 6, he wrote. No apology, no regret. I stared at the screen, my fingers itching to reply with the truth, "I'm done being your backdrop." Instead, I set the phone down, my resolve crystallizing. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about reclaiming Susan, the artist, the dreamer, the woman who deserved to be seen. The thought was daunting, a cliff's edge, but I was ready to jump. As the sun climbed, painting the sky with promise, I vowed to rediscover myself. No matter the cost. I'd been invisible too long, and I was done hiding. The porch swing groaned under me, a mournful sound that matched the ache in my chest. James's words, "You've let yourself go," slashed through my mind, as relentless as the Fairfield sun climbing the sky. Our colonial home, with its manicured lawn and restoration hardware charm, was a stage for my invisibility, every corner a reminder of the life I'd poured into him, Sarah, Michael, and never myself. At 63, I was unraveling, my heart a tangle of fury and sorrow. His betrayal wasn't just a cruel jab, it was a floodlight on my own complicity, illuminating the decades I'd spent erasing Susan to become the wife James wanted. The truth was a gut punch. I'd let myself disappear. I clutched the swing's chain, my knuckles white, and stared at the cul-de-sac where Linda jogged daily, her ponytail bouncing like a taunt. I'd been 23 when I fell for James, a wide-eyed artist sketching cityscapes and dreaming of Florence galleries. His drive swept me up, and I traded my canvases for carpool schedules, thinking it was love. I'd hosted his firm's 4th of July picnics, sewn Sarah's Halloween costumes, and smiled through his helpful hints, wear lipstick. Lose 10 pounds. I'd told myself it was partnership. Now, I saw it for what it was, a slow surrender of my soul. My throat burned, tears threatening, but they weren't for him. They were for the woman I'd buried under potlucks and PTA meetings. Why did I stay quiet? I hissed, my voice ablaze in the morning stillness. The question was a wound, bleeding memories of James's wandering eyes at cocktail parties, his laughter too bright with women like Linda while I refilled appetizers. I'd excused it, thinking loyalty meant silence, but silence had cost me everything. His words last night weren't just a comparison, they were a verdict, deeming me irrelevant. The pain was searing, a fire consuming the lies I'd lived by. But in its ashes, I felt something new, a pulse of defiance, a refusal to remain a ghost in my own life. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked to the mailbox, needing air, needing space. A neighbor waved, oblivious to the war inside me. I thought of my mother, her voice sharp in memory, "Don't let a man dim your light, Susan." I'd dismissed her, thinking my marriage was different. Now, her warning was my anchor. James's betrayal had cracked me open, but it also freed me. I wasn't just his wife, Sarah and Michael's mom, the woman who kept this house spotless. I was Susan, creative, curious, alive, and I'd silenced her too long. The realization was terrifying, a leap into a void, but it was also exhilarating. My phone pinged James, texting about a golf game, as if he hadn't shattered me. "Home late," he wrote, no hint of remorse. I gripped the phone, tempted to unleash years of pent-up truth. "You made me invisible, but I'm done fading." Instead, I pocketed it, my resolve stealing. This wasn't about confronting him, not yet. It was about saving myself. I'd start small, a new haircut, a sketchbook, a step toward the Susan I'd lost. As the morning breeze carried the scent of autumn, I made a vow, I'd rebuild myself, piece by piece, no matter how much it hurt. I'd been betrayed, by James, by myself, but I was ready to fight for my own light. The mailbox lid squeaked as I slammed it shut, James's careless text, "Home late," still searing my mind. His words from last night, "You've let yourself go," were a wildfire, torching the facade of our Fairfield life. Our colonial home, with its Ralph Lauren curtains and manicured roses, was a monument to my erasure, every gleaming surface a testament to the Susan I'd sacrificed for him, for Sarah, for Michael. At 63, I stood on the edge of a chasm, my heart a storm of rage and grief. James's betrayal wasn't just a jab at my appearance, it was a spotlight on my own betrayal, of the woman I'd been. The dreams I'd buried to play his perfect wife, I trudged back to the porch, the autumn air sharp with the promise of change. I'd been 23 when I met James, a painter with a sketchbook full of cityscapes and dreams of European adventures. His ambition was magnetic, and I swapped my brushes for a wedding registry, believing love meant compromise. I'd baked casseroles for his firm's potlucks, driven Michael to Cub Scouts, and nodded through James's suggestions, tighter jeans, brighter lipstick. I'd thought it was devotion. Now, I saw it as a slow suffocation, my identity whittled away until I was just a function, cook, cleaner, cheerleader for his success. My chest ached, a hollow where my own desires once thrived. How did I become this? I whispered, my voice cracking against the morning quiet. Tears welled, not just for James's cruelty but for the years I'd spent ignoring his slights, his eyes lingering on Linda at neighborhood barbecues, his jokes about my weight at dinner parties. I'd swallowed my hurt, thinking it was my job to keep our family intact. But his comparison to Linda wasn't just a wound, it was a wake-up call. I'd been complicit, letting myself fade into the background of his life. The pain was a blade, but it was also a spark, igniting a fury I hadn't felt in decades. I was done being invisible. I sank onto the porch steps, the wood cold against my thighs. My mind flashed to a memory of my mother, her hands worn from years of waitressing, her voice fierce. "Don't let a man make you small, Susan." I'd brushed her off, thinking my marriage was a partnership. Now, her words were a lifeline. James's betrayal had shattered me, but it also freed something, a hunger to reclaim the Susan who'd once danced in the rain, who'd wanted more than a spotless kitchen and a husband's approval. The thought was daunting, a tightrope over an abyss, but it was also electric. My phone buzzed again, James, confirming his golf plans, oblivious to the earthquake he'd triggered. "Don't wait up," he texted, no trace of guilt. I stared at the screen, my fingers itching to fire back. "I'm done being your shadow." Instead, I stood, my resolve hardening like steel. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about me. I'd start somewhere, maybe a walk to clear my head, a journal to capture my thoughts, a single step toward the woman I'd lost. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the cul-de-sac, I vowed to fight for myself. James had betrayed me, but I'd betrayed myself worse. Now, I saw it as a slow suffocation, my identity whittled away until I was just a function, cook, cleaner, cheerleader for his success. My chest ached, a hollow where my own desires once thrived. How did I become this? I whispered, my voice cracking against the morning quiet. Tears welled, not just for James's cruelty but for the years I'd spent ignoring his slights, his eyes lingering on Linda at neighborhood barbecues, his jokes about my weight at dinner parties. I'd swallowed my hurt, thinking it was my job to keep our family intact. But his comparison to Linda wasn't just a wound, it was a wake-up call. I'd been complicit, letting myself fade into the background of his life. The pain was a blade, but it was also a spark, igniting a fury I hadn't felt in decades. I was done being invisible. I sank onto the porch steps, the wood cold against my thighs. My mind flashed to a memory of my mother, her hands worn from years of waitressing, her voice fierce. "Don't let a man make you small, Susan." I'd brushed her off, thinking my marriage was a partnership. Now, her words were a lifeline. James's betrayal had shattered me, but it also freed something, a hunger to reclaim the Susan who'd once danced in the rain, who'd wanted more than a spotless kitchen and a husband's approval. The thought was daunting, a tightrope over an abyss, but it was also electric. My phone buzzed again, James, confirming his golf plans, oblivious to the earthquake he'd triggered. "Don't wait up," he texted, no trace of guilt. I stared at the screen, my fingers itching to fire back. "I'm done being your shadow." Instead, I stood, my resolve hardening like steel. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about me. I'd start somewhere, maybe a walk to clear my head, a journal to capture my thoughts, a single step toward the woman I'd lost. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the cul-de-sac, I vowed to fight for myself. James had betrayed me, but I'd betrayed myself worse. I drove to the local bookstore, a haven of worn armchairs and coffee-stained tables. My mother's voice echoed, "Don't let a man steal your spark, Susan." I'd ignored her, but now her wisdom fueled me. I bought a leather-bound journal, its blank pages a promise. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, pen trembling, and wrote, "I am more than his wife. I am Susan." The words felt radical, a rebellion against years of invisibility. I sketched a coastline, my hand unsteady but alive, the act a tether to the girl I'd been. Each stroke was a step toward growth, small but undeniable. My phone lit up. James, texting about a client meeting, no hint of remorse. "Late again," he wrote, as if I were still his dutiful shadow. I didn't respond. Instead, I booked a haircut for tomorrow, picturing a sleek bob, something bold. It wasn't about looking like Linda, it was about feeling like me. The thought was terrifying, a plunge into uncharted waters, but it was mine. As dusk painted the sky orange, I vowed to nurture this quiet transformation. James had shattered me, but I was rebuilding, line by line, choice by choice. I'd been invisible too long, and though the pain still throbbed, I was growing, silently, fiercely, into the woman I was meant to be. The mirror in our Fairfield bathroom was merciless, reflecting a woman I barely knew, gray streaks, tired eyes, and a heart still raw from James's betrayal. "You've let yourself go," he'd said, and those words were a splinter in my soul, festering as I stood in our colonial home, surrounded by anthropology throw pillows and framed memories of a life I'd built for him, for Sarah, for Michael. At 63, I was a storm of grief and defiance, my inner world a battlefield where betrayal, his and my own, fought for dominance. The kitchen clock ticked, each second a dare to keep shrinking or finally fight for the Susan I'd buried under decades of duty. I clutched the journal I'd bought yesterday, its pages already smudged with sketches and jagged confessions. I'd been 23 when I fell for James, a painter with dreams of Italian villas and sunlit canvases. His ambition was a siren call, and I swapped my art for a Williams-Sonoma apron, thinking it was love. I'd hosted his firm's Labor Day barbecues, sewn Michael's Boy Scout patches, and bitten my tongue when James suggested I skip dessert or brighten my wardrobe. I'd thought it was partnership. Now, I saw it as erasure, my identity sanded down until I was just a prop in his perfect suburban play. His comparison to Linda, with her CrossFit glow, wasn't just cruel, it was a wake-up call. How could I let myself vanish? I whispered, my voice ablaze in the quiet house. Tears burned, not just for James's words but for the years I'd ignored his slights, his lingering glances at Linda during neighborhood cookouts, his jokes about my aging body while I poured his coffee. I'd smothered my pain, believing my role was to keep our family seamless. But that role had cost me everything. The betrayal stung, but it also sparked a fierce resolve. I wasn't just a victim, I was awake, and the anger pulsing through me was a lifeline to the woman I'd been. I opened my journal, my pen scratching out a truth: I deserve to be seen. The words were a rebellion, a refusal to stay invisible. I thought of my mother, her voice fierce over diner coffee: "Don't let a man dim you, Susan." I'd scoffed, thinking my marriage was different. Now, her warning was my gospel. James's betrayal had gutted me, but it also freed a hunger to paint again, to laugh without apology, to live for me. I booked a photography class at the community center, a small act of defiance that felt like a leap. My hands shook, but they were steady enough to sketch a self-portrait, lines bold and unapologetic. My phone buzzed to James, texting about a late meeting, as if he hadn't shattered our world. "Don't wait up," he wrote, no trace of guilt. I stared at the screen, tempted to reply, "I'm done waiting." Instead, I set it down, my heart pounding with purpose. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about rebuilding Susan. The haircut I'd scheduled felt like armor, a step toward a bolder me. As twilight draped the cul-de-sac in soft purple, I vowed to keep growing, no matter the pain. James had betrayed me, but I'd betrayed myself worse. Now, I was fighting back, carving out a life where I'd never be invisible again. My new bob gleamed under the Fairfield bathroom light, a defiant slash against James's betrayal. "You've let yourself go," he'd said, and those words were a phantom, haunting me as I stood in our colonial home, its West Elm decor and family photos a gallery of my erasure. At 63, I was a raw wound, my heart churning with rage and a fragile hope. The kitchen, once my domain, now felt like a crime scene, where I'd lost myself to decades of pleasing him, Sarah, Michael, and where his comparison to Linda's Peloton-honed figure had shattered me. His betrayal was a mirror, reflecting my own. I'd let Susan, the dreamer, vanish, and the grief was a tidal wave. I gripped my journal, its pages thick with sketches and truths I'd been too scared to face. At 23, I'd been an artist. My heart set on Tuscan sunsets and gallery shows. James's charisma had pulled me in, and I traded my paints for a bed bath beyond registry, thinking it was love. I'd planned his firm's Memorial Day picnics, cheered at Sarah's soccer games, and swallowed his advice: were heels, smile brighter. I'd called it devotion. Now, I saw it as surrender, my identity chipped away until I was just his wife, a backdrop to his success. Linda's name wasn't just a jab, it was a clarion call, waking me to the life I'd let slip away. Why did I stay silent? I hissed, my voice a spark in the silent house. Tears stung, mourning the Susan who'd laughed freely, who'd wanted more than a perfect pie crust. I'd ignored James's wandering eyes at neighborhood bonfires, his teasing about my softening body while I cleared his plates. I'd thought endurance was strength, but it had hollowed me out. His betrayal was a gut punch, but it also lit a fire. I wasn't just hurt, I was alive, my anger a beacon guiding me back to myself. The photography class I'd joined, the sketches in my journal, they were lifelines, proof I could grow beyond his shadow. I sat at the dining table, penning a vow, I am enough. The words were a revolution. A rejection of the invisibility I'd accepted. My mother's voice rang clear, don't let a man dull your shine, Susan. I'd dismissed her, but now she was my North Star. James's words had broken me, but they'd also freed me to chase the Susan who dreamed big. I signed up for a yoga class, imagining my body strong, not for him but for me. My hands, once tied to his needs, now drew a cityscape, bold and free. My phone flashed, James, texting about a work dinner, no hint of remorse. Home after 9, he wrote, as if I were still his silent partner. I wanted to scream, I'm not your prop anymore. Instead, I silenced the phone, my resolve a steel thread. This was about me, reclaiming my voice. My art, my worth. The haircut was just the start, I'd buy a red dress, take a solo trip, live for Susan. As moonlight spilled across the cul-de-sac, I vowed to keep fighting. James had betrayed me, but I'd betrayed myself worse, letting myself fade. Now, I was rising, heart bruised but fierce, ready to claim the life I deserved. No matter how much it hurt, moonlight sliced through the Fairfield dining room, casting shadows on my journal, where I'd scrawled my truth against James's betrayal. You've let yourself go. His words were a wound that pulsed with every heartbeat, tearing open 40 years of sacrifices in our colonial home, its Joanna Gaines-inspired decor a mockery of my invisibility. At 63, I was a tempest of grief and defiance, my soul battered by his comparison to Linda's gym-toned glamour and my own failure to fight for Susan, the artist, the dreamer, the woman I'd buried to be his wife, Sarah, and Michael's mom. The pain was a crucible, forging a resolve to rise from my own ashes. I traced the journal's pages, filled with sketches and vows to reclaim myself. At 23, I'd been alive with ambition, sketching harbors and craving art-filled summers in Rome. James's charm had swept me up. And I swapped my dreams for a Target shopping list, thinking it was love. I'd grilled burgers for his firm's summer bashes, sewn Sarah's prom dress, and endured his tips, less makeup, more cardio. I'd called it commitment. Now, I saw it as betrayal, my essence eroded until I was just a role in his suburban script. Linda's name wasn't just a cut, it was a call to wake up, to see how I'd let myself vanish. How did I lose her? I whispered, my voice a shard in the quiet. Tears fell, not just for James's cruelty but for the Susan who'd once danced barefoot, who'd wanted more than a gleaming dishwasher. I'd brushed off his glances at Linda during block parties, his jokes about my aging frame while I served his guests. I'd thought silence was love, but it had hollowed me out. His words were a mirror, showing my own betrayal, years of prioritizing his comfort over my soul. Yet, in the agony, a spark flared. I wasn't just broken, I was awake, my anger a torch lighting the path to rebirth. I stood, my hand steady as I wrote, I am Susan, and I am enough. The words were a declaration, a refusal to stay unseen. My mother's voice echoed, don't let a man steal your heart's fire, Susan. I'd ignored her, but now she guided me. James's betrayal had shattered me, but it also unleashed a hunger, to paint, to live boldly, to be whole. The photography and yoga classes I'd joined were seeds. Now, I planned a solo weekend at a coastal inn, a canvas for my rediscovery. My sketches, once timid, grew vivid, a lighthouse, standing firm against the storm. My phone glowed, James, texting about a late conference call, no shred of regret. Don't wait, he wrote, as if I were still his shadow. I wanted to reply, I'm done waiting for you. Instead, I turned it off, my heart a drumbeat of purpose. This was my fight to reclaim my voice, my art, my life. I'd buy that red dress, hang my photos in a local gallery, live for me. As dawn hinted at the horizon, painting the cul-de-sac gold, I vowed to keep rising. James had betrayed me, but I'd betrayed myself worse, letting my light dim. Now, I was forging a new Susan, scarred but fierce, ready to claim every dream I'd deferred. No matter the cost, Susan's story isn't just about heartbreak, it's about finding the courage to rediscover who you are, no matter your age. At 63, she's proving it's never too late to chase your dreams and live for yourself. What's one step you can take today to reclaim your spark? Drop it in the comments, I'd love to hear your story. If this inspired you, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that red subscribe button with the bell so you don't miss our next story of transformation. Let's keep growing together, see you in the next video.